Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Maybe I'll just come down over there and have a bit of a chat. When I was asked to have come and speak over here, I thought I should talk obviously about something quite topical. There were about 3 questions that were sent to me. One of them was about productivity, the other was about the shortage of skill sets, and the third one, it escapes me, but I'll come back to that. I just thought I'd quickly put a short presentation to you, given the fact that we have got a budget to be delivered on the 15th of July. And what are some of the key considerations as far as the economy is concerned? What are the most topical issues? And of course, things that may, or factors that may have an impact on your businesses, on you as employers, and of course, some of you are employees too. So very quickly, COVID-19 obviously is the main headline as far as the economy is concerned. Nobody expected globally ever for all borders to close down in the 21st century, but that's precisely what happened. Fiji, of course, shut down, USA, UK, everywhere shut down. Being a services-driven economy, we obviously were hit quite, in a very impactful manner, where our economy contracted by 17.2%, given the fact that 40% of our economy was dependent on tourism, directly or indirectly. Our economy, as you can see over here, that we lost quite a significant amount of GDP. $4.6 billion actually came off our GDP. So, we were sitting at about 11.88 billion in 2019. 2020, we contracted by 17%. And of course, a further 4.1% in 2021. So significantly, what happened was our GDP actually came down. We lost about 4.6 billion from our GDP. Government lost revenue, over 50% of revenue overnight. Because tourists weren't coming, no VAT payable, no STT, no ECAL. And of course, people who lived off the tourism sector also suffered significantly. We had about 110,000 people who became unemployed. And we lost about $4 billion in foreign exchange from tourism earnings. Tourists, as you know, bring a lot of foreign exchange for us. The international benchmark of having what we call a healthy balance of foreign reserves is 3 months worth of foreign reserves to do trading. We currently are sitting at 9 months worth of foreign reserves. We sit over $3 billion worth of foreign reserves. And I'll tell you how we actually achieved that, notwithstanding the fact that we lost $4 billion in foreign exchange because of the tourism sector shutting down. As I mentioned, government revenue decreased by 50%, lost a total of about $2.8 billion in tax revenues. And of course, socioeconomic conditions were exacerbated by the fact that people became unemployed. The story that I do like telling is not only about people who are employed in the formal sector, but also those people in the informal sector. If you go to Nandi Airport, outside Nandi Airport, there's a nice bus shelter which is built by AFL. And behind the bus shelter, you see a whole lot of thick trees, trees in a huge succession being planted next to each other. Outside there, before COVID-19, you had a lot of women in particular who sold lovo packs, mithai, roti curry, roti pasal, boiled evi, etc. These people, their customers weren't the tourists. Their customers were the people who worked at AFL. Outside Fiji Airways, same group of people will be selling mithai, boiled evi, dal cassava, lovo packs. These people's customers were also, again, people who worked at Fiji Airways. If those businesses no longer were operational, these people also no longer had any income. We had the last survey done, I think back about 4 or 5 years ago, by the Reserve Bank of Fiji, showed that over 130,000 Fijians lived and earning from the informal sector. So they don't have FNPF. They don't have any other, type of assistance given to them. They live on a daily basis. If you go to the Outrigger Hotel, you'll see all these women along the corridors or the passageways who are making handicraft. They don't get paid by the Outrigger. They simply get given a space by Outrigger to come and sell the handicraft. So these women suddenly did not have an income. The people who come and do meke from the village every second night, they no longer have an income. They're not paid FNPF by these people, but in the informal sector. So our challenge as government, of course, it's very easy to identify those people who have FNPF accounts. So we said you could withdraw your FNPF monies at a set number of dollars on a fortnightly basis. should you not have any funds or should your funds run out, we will pay you $225 a fortnight through the FNPF account. But of course, those people who are selling the mithai and the lower packs, they're not covered by FNPF. So thus, the rolling out of the $90 per household, $50 per person, and then of course the famous 360. Now, we had a no jab, no job policy. Those who were employers obviously had to implement that. There was a law and there was a rationale behind it. The moment that the word vaccine was mentioned, as a government, we actually reached out. The Prime Minister, through his role as Minister of Foreign Affairs, reached out to all our bilateral partners. We only spoke to the World Bank, IMF, ADBs of the world, and said, look, we know that we will get pushed to the bottom of the line, and it's a reality. USA population nearly 300 million people. If they go to the pharmaceutical company and say need 2 rounds of vaccines, they'll place an order of 600 million doses. We're not even 900,000 people. But assuming we are 900,000 people, our order would only be 1.8 million doses. Who would get the order first? Commercial sets. So through the efforts, we were able to get, the Indians gave us 100,000 doses first, then the Aussies did, then the Kiwis did, then the Americans did, and all of you in this room who have been vaccinated, the 2 rounds, have got your boosters or double boosters, none of you paid a single cent. Neither have we as government, because of the efforts we made. But of course, we pay for the administering of those vaccines. You know, we send out nurses on horseback or boats, etc., to go out and get these things administered. But as a result of that, we were able to open up our borders on the 1st of December. The most highest rated vaccinated countries in the developing world, and in such a quick and a short period of time. You may remember last year, at one point in time, everybody's panicking, saying we had 1,000 cases, 2,000 cases, 3,000 cases, and today we're in a very good space. So the Fijian economy is projected to grow by 11.3% in 2022. That's the Macroeconomic Committee's prediction, which is made up of the Governor Reserve Bank, Permanent Secretary of Economy, Bureau of Statistics, etc. As you know, ANZ has said we'll grow by 22%. I hope ANZ is right. Westpac has said around about 11 or 12%, my understanding. IMF has said just slightly below 11%. Now, if you see the tourism recovery, you can see what happened here. Sorry, hope I don't. You can see the tourism numbers in 2020 was 147,000. I think a lot of it also, includes some VFRs, etc. In 2021 is 32,000 only last year. A lot of it includes people who do travel and maybe on foreign passports, not exactly tourists per se. Projected is 447,000 tourists this year. We're already seeing, in terms of the cumulative to May of 2022, visa arrivals around 45% of pre-pandemic levels. For the month of May, visa arrivals were about 65% of pre-pandemic levels. Of May 2019, you compare that to now, it's 65%. Major source markets, Australians are 90%. Kiwis, arrivals with about 2/3 of the pre-COVID levels. Kiwis, as you know, have recently only opened up their borders, or allowing the citizens to, come in and out freely. June and July bookings are looking even better. The Hilton, for example, we were there on the weekend. It's on Sunday, I think it was about 98%. On some days, Fiji Airways is flying 3 times a day to Sydney, and Australia is looking pretty good. The American flights are also coming online too. The LA flights are almost practically full nearly every day, and it flies every day now. Now, there's a lot of course, inflationary pressure. These are very sort of topical issues which I wanted to highlight to you because it does feed into things like pay rise and the pressure to have pay rises. And why the justification, for example, of the $4 minimum and national minimum wage increase, etc. Fuel prices are now about over $100 a barrel. It's about $120 a barrel at the moment. If you can see, I don't know if I have it here, but only a few months ago, about 18 months or so ago, it was below $30. It was about $24 a barrel. Now it's about $120 a barrel. Those of you, of course, are into freight and know about freight would know that even prior to the Russia-Ukraine war, the cost of freight went up. Supply chain issues, China, major parts of it was still locked down. Largest manufacturer in the world, containers are kept in their ports, less containers available, therefore the prices go up. Waiting time in ports like LA, etc., boats actually just hovering around in the ocean for about 20 hours or so. Not enough capacity. The other day there was an article in a few days ago, in New Zealand, for example, at the moment, just to give you a sort of similar analogy, the hospitality sector is suffering because there's a shortage of staff. People don't want to work in cafes and hotels. Kiwis have decided to change their profession. So a lot of them aren't actually opening the hours that they want to open or they're normally used to. What does that mean for us? They may probably poach our people. That's something that we have to be acutely aware of too. They've already poached about, I understand, 60 accountants in the past 1 year or so. Shortage of accountants in Australia. There's a shortage of tradespeople. Shortage of nurses. Last week on ABC TV you would have seen in Victoria, the state of Victoria, a public hospital, the turnaround time was 24 hours. Not enough nurses. Nurses don't want to work. A lot of nurses actually died in Melbourne. So there's this fear factor. So they're looking for nurses from elsewhere. So from a strategic perspective, we have to be able to plan around these issues. So, for example, things like fertilizer. Before pandemic, a bag of fertilizer cost $45.65. The cane farmer pays $20. We subsidize $25.65. Before the Russia-Ukraine war, the price landed on our desk was $80 a bag. The farmer does not want to pay anything more than $20, so we have to pick up the $80 balance. Of course, Russia-Ukraine war now has pushed it even further. They make many of the raw ingredients, Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine. The war, of course, did not help. In fact, I was not aware of this, many people weren't aware of this, but it produces about 30% of the world's wheat supply. Feeds 400 million people in the world. That is called the breadbasket of Europe. So it's a huge impact. India has decided it's not going to export any of its wheat because they are concerned if there's a worldwide shortage, they don't want their people to go hungry, so they've shut down their borders as far as wheat trade is concerned. So again, putting pressure on wheat price. If you look at our inflation here, it's gone up to about 5%. It was below 0% from around about October 2019 to around about January 2021, and of course it's steadily increased since then. Imported inflation, you can see, which is in the red, has been steadily way above the domestic inflation. Domestic inflation has readily, stayed quite steady. Of course, when we have a cyclone, it spikes up. Long beans cost $2 before a cyclone. After cyclone, it's $5 or $7. Yongona cost $85 a kilo before Cyclone Winston in Suva. After Cyclone Winston, $185 a kilo. Everybody still drank it at the same rate. The point is that these are the domestic inflationary impact. Those of you who also order stuff, you know that it takes now, lead time is about 6 months, 3 months, etc., where before it was quite quick turnaround times. Inflation, of course, is a problem not just for us. USA is 8.5% in May. Euro area is 7.4, Australia is about 5.1, we are about 5, New Zealand 6.9, UK of course a whopping 9.1%. These lines also show you the world food price index. You can see it's significantly high. Oil price index also. Cereals price index, all of them are basically on the rise except sugar, which seems to be fairly steady, which is unfortunate for us because the sugar price remains almost steady. That's the only commodity, large commodity that we actually export, which has remained quite stagnant. So what have we done? And a lot of people have talked about devaluation, etc., but we had anticipated this. So there were some strategic decisions that were made and taken Because for us, as a country that buys almost everything from offshore, apart from your dal, cassava, bhaji, bhindi, boda, and all of that, nearly everything else is imported. The clothes you're wearing are imported, the watches you're wearing are imported, clothes may be sewn here, but the fabric is imported. This carpet is imported, the mic I'm holding, nearly everything here is imported. Cars are all imported. We have to have foreign reserves to pay for that. In anticipation, and because of the border shutting down, obviously we knew that our foreign reserves would be dramatically affected. Normally when we borrow, as all governments borrow, the permutation that we have is that 70% of our borrowings are from onshore. So we have less foreign currency exposure. Plus or minus 5, and 30% is borrowed externally. This time we changed the permutation around. We borrowed more from offshore. Borrowing more from offshore meant we got more foreign reserves, more foreign money, which actually inflated our foreign reserves, which is why we are in this position at this point in time. It also meant new money has come into the system. That's why liquidity is fairly high in the banking system. Because we also want that when the economy bounces back, when people need access to finance, the cost of finance should be attractive. The bank should not gouge or gorge. So that's the reason why we're in this position. Fiscal stability, as you know, when the economy contracts, as any Keynesian economist would tell you, you need to actually inject some funds into the economy to keep the economy rolling over. So within capacity, you have to be, for example, be able to continue with infrastructure works. So it did not completely come to a stop. But many of the infrastructure projects were actually put on hold because you need to have that level of capacity. So our focus also was on the socioeconomic aspects. Socioeconomic aspects meant making sure that people had some form of financial assistance. So over $200 million was funded through FNPF for those people in the formal sector to be able to get access to finance to live because they've lost their jobs. And then of course in the informal sector, all those people applying for the informal sector, nobody had to go and queue outside the district officer's office or Ministry of Women, Children and Poverty Alleviation or any other office. Took them less than 3 minutes to apply on the phone, and they got paid when they were approved in an instant. We rolled out over $200 million in that way. We could have paid out all of the monies for example, 360 for the first round in one day, but we didn't because we didn't want everybody queuing up Digicel and Vodafone. It would probably spread more COVID. Those are the things you have to consider in making these policy decisions. And we wanted, of course, more stores to have QR codes. And this is why we, in the last budget, actually funded shops to get QR codes. We are paying money up front. So that obviously pumped money into the system. Whether somebody spent 360 drinking all of it in beer, very few people did, but some did. A lot of people paid their rent. A lot of people bought clothes, shoes, and food, fundamentally. Even if they spent 20 bucks on beer, that's fine. They all paid VAT. So when somebody went and did shopping, they hired a taxi, they hired a carrier, they took the bus, it moved the economy. So in this way, $500 million of assistance was put into the system, $430 million directly in cash. Now, we of course, in all of this, we gave budget support grants, increased concessional borrowings. RBF lends at 0.25%. They lend at no more than 3.99% of financial institutions. 2 years of interest rate is paid by us. They don't pay any principal payments in those 2 years, and in the third year they start doing the repayment. Those sorts of things obviously have assisted a lot of people. Over $100 million has been disbursed predominantly through FDB. And then of course, as you know, that we removed STT, completely gone. ECAL was reduced from 10% to 5%. Departure tax reduced from $200 to $100. Deferment of tax payments, reduction in FNPF contribution, as you know, was 5.8. It went down to 5.5. Now it's gone to 6.6. All of that was done to actually give some form of relief, some form of comfort to the businesses. They don't want business to shut down. We also had, for example, 200% tax incentive or deduction for those landlords who reduced the rents, commercial rents. Many, unfortunately, did not. Some did, though, and they took advantage of it. And of course, as I mentioned about the $200 million guarantee scheme, I'm skipping through this really quickly. You can ask me questions on it later or anything else. So, you know, I find it really interesting. A lot of people have become debt experts in Fiji now. A lot of people want to talk about debt without actually understanding debt. I was with a group of women's groups in Nandi at Nandi Civic Center on Saturday. There's about 120, 130 women from different groups, from villages, surrounding areas, different farming areas, etc. And the whole session was about explaining to them about inflation. And, you know, women tend to think a lot more strategically than men. They tend to think a lot more long term. It's quite clear and quite evident when you actually go and have these sessions and the questions that they do ask. So we had this session for them, and as we explained to them in very simple terms, I said, if a government borrows money, for example, if you borrow money to put a nice big convention center on, you know, somewhere in Tamavua, for government dignitaries to go and have cocktails there whenever some person comes from overseas, and you borrow money to do that, that's redundant use of money. It's not good use of money. It's not good use of debt. But if you are going to borrow money to give people or connect people to electricity, to water, to schools, to nursing stations, etc., then it's good use of money. In particular, if you're going to increase the productive capacity of the citizens of the country or different areas. Of course, in the COVID time also, in order, because of the shortfall in the revenue, if we borrowed money to ensure that everybody got some form of financial assistance, that's good use of money. Because it not only stopped a social catastrophe, but also provided economic robustness. So we had to increase our borrowing to sustain the economy. The alternative, and this is the main point, alternative of not borrowing and supporting the economy during the last 2 years would have been catastrophic. A lot of people don't understand this. They said, oh, they got 9 years of growth. Where's the money gone to? It's like kindergarten approach to things. Australia has grown for 23 years prior to the pandemic. 20 years of growth. Look at the amount of debt Australia accumulated. It jumped from 42% of GDP to 62%. Notwithstanding the fact it had 23 years of growth. They had to borrow money. Growth does not mean governments don't borrow money. It means that the size of the pie increases, but that event like a pandemic can actually cut down the size of the pie overnight. And that's precisely what happened throughout the world. So almost every country increases borrowing levels substantially. New Zealand, traditionally very low debt to GDP ratio, 28%, jumped to 52%. Fiji went from 46 to 80%. A lot of people don't realize that Cyclone Winston, in 36 hours, wiped off 1/3 of the value of our GDP. In 36 hours. We had a $500 million rebuild. We spent over $200 million just in rebuilding schools. Notwithstanding that, our debt to GDP ratio was 46%. Of course, the pandemic was a real spanner in the works. We went up to 80%. You can see other countries. I mean, put here similarly, you know, tourism-based countries. St. Lucia, 60 to 96. Mauritius, 66 to 101. Bahamas, same thing. UK jumped from 86 to 109. USA, of course, in a different league altogether. They were already 107% debt to GDP ratio. They became 133%. Suriname, Samoa actually went the other way, 53 to 48. But, you know, even countries like Japan, the debt to GDP ratio is over 200%. So where to from here? Recovery of tourism, of course, is critical, but that is not to say that government is not working and has been working behind the scenes in respect of making sure that we have other factors that contribute to the economy. One of the areas, of course, that is growing significantly is the BPO sector. Over 3,000 jobs were created in the last 2 years in the BPO sector. Last year I had a discussion with, I was part of a discussion where the Australian businesses who had BPO outfits in Philippines looking at moving to Fiji. Our government has, for example, given $200,000 to the BPO Council to fund their operations, to ensure that they go out and actually do market themselves. The Australian government has actually partnered with us also the consultant for the Australian government has said they expect 100,000 jobs in the BPO sector in the next 10 years. A lot of opportunities. 70% of the population is below the age of 40. 65% of our population is below the age of 35. Most of the people who work in the BPO sector are between the ages of 19 and 33. So opportunities for them. What we're also seeing that the BPO sector does provide opportunities for a lot of people to study and work part-time. We're seeing that because it allows a level of flexibility. Some of them work 24/7, 3 shifts. So in the meantime, of course, the tourism sector is critically important. We also need to be able to, in the tourism sector, be a lot more nuanced about the way that we run our tourism sector. I was at one hotel this morning in the West, and I was having breakfast, and I heard some tourists, they were looking for spoons, and they came to where the cutlery was, and they were talking to each other. They said, look, there's too many of us and too few of them are working. Let's just get it ourselves. We have to be mindful of that. Thailand is now opening up. Bali is now opening up. If you see some of the rates that they're offering, it's phenomenal at 5-star resorts. They want to capture the market. They want to get a share of the market really quickly. Our greatest strength are our people. But people are also now becoming very sensitive about, of course, first thing is health. So being vaccinated is not only about yourself and your family and your community, but it's also about how people see us, whether we are a safe destination or not. Some people have said to me recently, oh, we're going to travel to that country. I was told to go to a conference, but I don't want to go because the rate of vaccination is very low. I don't want to catch COVID. So there is that, of course, that new way of thinking. The other way, of course, is about being price sensitive. Not killing the tourists on our F&B. I've continuously said this for a number of years. A stubby in Sheraton and various other places before used to cost $15 a stubby. In Bali, I can walk down on the beach and get it for $2. So if I have, spouses, children, and a bowl of fries is going to cost me $20 for room service at the Sheraton, and Bali it cost me $5, where am I going to go? These are the things we need to be sensitive about. Tourism sector needs to be sensitive about. The other one is obviously offering new experiences. We just sun, sand, and the beach at the moment. We're not thinking beyond that. There's fantastic places inside Viti Levu. Nobody's thinking of building rooms there in a nice sort of hilly areas, cool waterfalls, etc. Those kind of experiences need to become a lot more mature in our tourism sector. So, we don't know, for example, what's going to happen in Russia, Ukraine. God knows how long it's going to last. Is it going to expand to other countries? We just heard that EU has agreed to Ukraine joining the EU now, and one other neighboring country. What does it mean? Is it going to mean another threat to Russia and sees it as a threat? We don't know how long it will go on for. So if it's going to go on for a prolonged period of time, does that mean 30% of the world's wheat supply will now stop forever? Russia is the 3rd largest producer of fuel, oil. Not many people knew that. It's part of what we call OPEC plus now. USA has one of the largest reserves, but they don't want to touch the reserves because they want to probably be the last country holding all the oil in the world when everybody else dries up. So there's a lot of power play going on. We, of course, have absolutely no control over it. We buy all our oil or fuel from Singapore. The 3 fuel companies buy it from Singapore. Of course, they pay US dollars. So those are some of the matters beyond our control. Climate change is critically important. You have to consider that. I brought my book. I hope I've got it here. The Climate Change Act. It applies to the private sector, ladies and gentlemen. Please read it. Please understand it. It's going to soon apply to you. This year, in this cyclone season, we had only one cyclone, Cyclone Kodi. Some may argue it did not cost that much or did not cause that much damage. But those of you who drive along the Queen's Highway would know that in Kambisi, the highway went. There's a big hole in the ground. The one lane went near Semo. One lane went near Nawai. In Ba and various other places, lanes went. Those things cost a lot of money. Unanticipated costs. So climate change, this is why we talk a lot about climate change. This is why we're going to advocate a lot about it. Fiji, for example, is deemed to be a middle-income country. Therefore, we could not get concessional financing from the World Bank. They treated us like any other country. We were knocking on the doors for about 4 or 5 years, and finally now we get concessional funding from the World Bank because we have said we want to highlight to you our vulnerability to climate change. Like I said, Cyclone Winston, within 36 hours, wiped off 1/3 of the value of our GDP. Highly significant. So therefore, we should be entitled to concessional financing. Earlier on, I had highlighted what you borrow money for, and the other thing was the cost of money. World Bank now lends us to money under the IDA funds at 0% interest rate, a service fee of 0.75%, payable over 40 years, 10-year grace period, which essentially means we have what we call about a 53% or 55% grant element. In other words, we pay back only 45% of what we borrowed. The Japanese have also lent to us at 0.01%. 40-year term, 10-year grace period, payable over obviously 40 years. The grace period we don't pay in the first 10 years. Again, this got about a 60% grant element. In other words, what we borrow, we only pay back 40% of what we borrowed. The so-called experts on debt in Fiji and the politicians won't tell you that. Anybody who's a banker will be able to calculate that quite easily. Oops, something happened. Oh, here. So, the private sector, of course, we are saying will have to take the lead in the post-COVID-19 recovery. Governments will focus on ensuring macroeconomic stability. It's critically important. Confidence building, improving competitiveness and productivity, in terms of taxes, technology, and skill sets. And there's some of the questions that you've got goes to the heart of what we're saying in terms of our policy direction. And as you know, we've removed things like no more business license requirements. Have to pay stamp duties. All of that is gone. So one of the advantages of, I suppose, having COVID was that it gave us the ability to, look at everything from a clean slate. And even the bureaucrats who normally would resist, if you said in a normal times, let's remove business license or let's get rid of stamp duties, there would be a lot of resistance. But because we had to start off from scratch, new paradigm altogether, we were able to get some of these policy measures across the line fairly quickly. We have to, the counter-cyclical fiscal response to the crisis was appropriate. One of the things that we did do, as I talked about earlier on. We'll focus more on fiscal consolidation. Can anybody guess how much we pay civil servants in their pay every year? What's the quantum of it? None of the PSs should respond to this. They know the answer to this. Can anybody take a guess? You won't get penalized for being wrong. Don't see. It's $1.1 billion. That's our salary for civil servants. It covers all the sectors, all the discipline forces, all the ministries you deal with on a daily basis, $1.1 billion. And the rest, of course, the other 2/3 is on operational expenditure, other operational expenditure, and of course, capital expenditure. So we have to have a fiscal consolidation in the years going ahead. We have to look at more smarter ways of, for example, ensuring that revenue is collected, ensuring that we are a lot more smarter in terms of appointments, in terms of streamlining processes. This is why, for example, government has now said that every government ministry where there's going to be payment done, you have to have an FPOS machine. That's the first start. And of course, very soon we'll be starting online payments, etc. This reduces the level of human intervention. It also means it creates a lot more efficiency, and of course, at the same time, it increases a lot of transparency in the processes. We've looked at, as you know, the state-owned enterprises. We've strategically looked at divesting some of our shares. We don't sell shares or divest our shares for the sake of it. The EFL divestment, for example, it took nearly 3 years. We wanted the right partner. Today, EFL paid out the largest dividend it's ever paid out in its history. They made over $90 million in profit before tax. And Chugoko, which is the Japanese company, they've partnered up with JBIC, is very much at the forefront of renewable energy. One of the reasons why EFL, for example, was able to have that level of profit was because they got a very healthy level of rain, amount of rain. So we were able to ramp up Monosabu. Rain is free, sunlight is free, wind is free. The technology, of course, is not free. The cost of the technology up front can be more expensive. But in the long run, obviously, it's a lot more beneficial. So Chugoko was, in fact, a very critical partner in all of this, and they specialize in this area. Economic diversification is critically important. Like I said, we're looking at economically diversifying the economy. We've been doing that slowly and surely. The fact that we've invested in so much money in, for example, in telecommunications, we paid upfront for the next gen Southern Cross cable, $20 million. We now have a cable that's landed in Sabu a few years ago. TFL, we are told in the next couple of years, we'll also be laying a fiber optic cable from Sabu to Lambasa. We would like the idea of having BPOs in Vanuatu. We like to keep the people in Vanuatu. We like to send people from Viti Levu to Vanuatu. The population density between Nosori and Lemi is very high. Huge squatter issues. A lot of land in Vanuatu, underutilized. So those are the strategic, we are looking at that. We are of course talking to the World Bank in terms of developing a strategy for Vanuatu and some of the key areas of economic development in Vanuatu that we are looking at, including, for example, a greenfield airport. We need to, for example, also have redundancies. God forbid, if we have a cyclone or a volcano in Viti Levu, we need to have a redundant airport. You have to think strategically. A volcano happened in Tonga. If we have one down, somewhere in Viti Levu, we need to have an airport. We need that connectivity. This is why we currently are considering another submarine cable to build redundancy apart from the Southern Cross cable. It was interesting that in the last year when we shut down these agriculture exports, areas such as, for example, ginger and turmeric has grown significantly. Turmeric or haldi, as people call it in Fiji. Very highly sought after. Apparently the grade of ginger and turmeric we has a particular level of potency that we don't know about, but many other people know about. Things like sajan or moringa. There's somebody who's from New Zealand who's got a farm somewhere in Tavua, Vatukola. They've grown over 1,000 sajan trees. And they actually extract oil, which they sell for about $50 a bottle. As you know, we've also announced about industrial hemp. We had a meeting just last week with one of the UN agencies talking to some companies in Australia and about how we're going to go about industrial hemp. A lot of potential, a lot of use of industrial hemp. It has to have a THC level of below 1%. Only then it can be classified industrial hemp, otherwise you start smoking it. Industrial hemp, even if you smoke an entire field, you can't get high. So just to put that caveat in case some of you start thinking otherwise. But there's a lot of potential. Of course, as you know, many countries now have also moved into what we call medicinal hemp. It's used as an alternative to morphine. Many countries are producing it under license. So I mean, there are sort of new frontiers. But we're also looking at some of the other areas, as we said. We need to attract efficiency-seeking investments. Making productive land more accessible. We provide a lot of incentives. One of them, of course, for example, as you know, we have the Itaukea Land Development Fund. There's about 6 or 7 sites from memory where if Itaukea landowners come to us and they say to us, we want to subdivide the land, we actually pay for the subdivision of the land. Now what that does, it strikes a number of fronts at once. Firstly, it engenders that sense amongst Itaukea landowners that holding on to land is not going to give them any benefit, but it will actually give them income. They can not only be asset rich, but also cash poor. The land still belongs to them, but you give 99-year leases. But it also then makes land available to people at 99-year leases. So then those people can go and lease those lands and in fact build on those lands, and banks of course use it as collateral. The stock of homes in Fiji is very low. Very few people buy their first home at between the ages of 20 and 30. Very few people. Availability is very, very less. In fact, that's what's putting a lot of people to go to money lenders. I don't know how many you've seen, the banks can tell you see footage of people when the money hits your accounts at about 3 or 4 a.m. in the morning. All these money lenders turn up with this many ATM cards with all the PIN numbers and take out the money. It's actually a very sorry sight, because these people cannot access money through mainstream banks. So what they do is they give the ATM cards as security to the money lenders. Some of them charge a whopping 25%, 30% interest rate. And the reason why they don't access or can't access mainstream finances is because they don't have any asset base. Some of you work in banks, some of your staff actually probably living on mangroves in some squatter area in Suva, Nasori area. They're living on top of a sewage plant or sewage pipe. That's the reality. So you want to change that reality. We have at the moment a project with IFC. We have identified about 6 sites, 5 of which are between Suva and Nasori area. The housing authority sites where we're going to develop with the private sector, hopefully get some people from overseas to be able to develop, for example, strata titles. We need to change our thinking around home ownership. You can get a 99-year lease on a strata title, just as good as a home. But the cost structure obviously is less. You only have one roof to deal with. So those are the kind of things we are currently looking at in terms of the structural changes. In land being more land being available. Of course, ensuring right skill set. There are 2 types of people who leave Fiji. And we've seen that obviously post-87, where a lot of people feel discriminated against, whether it's because of ethnicity or province or religion or whatever it is. They feel they won't get an equal participation in the workplace environment or business environment, so they decide to leave. There are then some people who leave because their skill set is highly in demand. So when there's a Christchurch earthquake, New Zealand has a shortage of tradespeople, plumbers, joiners, etc., builders, bricklayers. A lot of them, they took them to Christchurch. And some of them were then subsequently given permanent residency. So there are 2 categories of people. At this point in time, what we are seeing is that people are leaving because their skill sets is highly in demand. There's a shortage of apparently physics, maths, and science teachers in New Zealand and Australia. So they are poaching hours. Shortage of people in the trades area. As I said, accountants also. Recently, I visited a family member who's been living in Australia since the 1970s. He's in a home. He's got, dementia. Every single person that worked at that nursing home was a foreigner. So not necessarily all Aussies want to go and work in a nursing home. So there are people who are from Philippines, there are people from Afghanistan, there are people from Thailand. We are now getting people in Fiji who are attending courses to get certified to provide aged care because they're high in demand. Australia has an aging population. So these are the challenges we'll face. Some of the people actually are doing good jobs in other professions. We have thousands, literally, of predominantly women who work on the west coast of North America, mainly in California, providing aged care services. They get paid $150 a day. They get meals, they get accommodation. A lot of them illegally. The reason why we chose Lautoka Hospital for the PPP was for a number of reasons. Of course, Lautoka is not that far away from Suva, so if you need open heart surgery, you can come there. God willing, they'll be providing that from July, the open heart surgery being made available there. But it also means our people get to go there, don't have to go to India. If you can afford it, to go to Australia and New Zealand, or if some insurance company you insured with them and you go to some other place. But it also means that we can have medical tourism. When we first bought our MRI machine, the people who used it a lot were other Pacific Islanders because they don't have MRI machines and they paid full fees. So there are a lot of procedures that will be made available under this PPP scheme that other Pacific Islanders will want to use also. So Nandi Airport is only half an hour away from Lautoka. That's one of the key reasons. Australia before pandemic had about a 2-year wait on elective surgeries in the public health system. If you are able to have an Australian certified hospital in Fiji, there's a possibility of getting those elective surgeries done in Fiji. Part of the deal of this PPP is that they build a new wing in which they'll have a learning operating theatre, so our people, our doctors can actually learn those particular procedures. There's not a single Fijian doctor in Fiji that can carry out open heart surgery, which I think is a great tragedy in the 21st century. Only recently we had Dr. Biribo who can do neurosurgery. He's come back from New Zealand, spending 2 years there. So the idea is to build capacity. The idea is to tap into tourism. The fourth element, of course, is that if we have people who are so good with children and also so good with elderly people, why can't we have retirement villages in Fiji? So the idea is to have the investment in Fiji. Of course, the West is better than the East. The people are better in the Western Division. I thought I'd sneak that in. The weather obviously is a lot better, and it's close to the Nandi International Airport. And there's already a mature tourism sector in the Western Division. So they're the reason why we chose. These are kind of some of the strategic thinking we've had in respect of why we've chosen these sites. So we know that some construction companies, for example, at the moment, they do import labor. And we've had requests about getting them longer permits. And that's some of the things we are working through. The new regulations will be put in place very soon. We had a request from one of the companies saying instead of giving 18 months work permit for construction workers, can you get it for 3 years? Those are some of the ideas that we are obviously open to. So there's a lot of those sort of work that's going on in the background. We need to be obviously very agile. We need to be able to be responsive to the situation change. And of course the situation is changing quite rapidly. As we found, for example, when COVID started, nobody knew, well, who will be the most vulnerable, the elderly or the young? It kept on changing. We need to be able to be agile to be able to respond to that. The productivity issue, as you know, that when we announced the minimum wage being increased to $4 an hour by January of next year with quarterly increments from the 1st of April until January of next year, we also did say that we'll be putting in place a productivity commission. There's a budgetary allocation in the budget. So Ministry of Employment is currently working on it. We said it will be modeled along the Australian lines because I know a lot of employers are concerned about productivity. So that's some of the work that's currently being done. It would be premature for me to, comment on what we've come up with. But of course, once they reach the stage of being able to hold consultations, they'll reach out to you, all the employers, and have those consultations with you. And I know Minister Bala is working on that as we speak. So, where to from here? I mean, development obviously has to be inclusive to be sustainable. We need to continue in education. During COVID, it would have been very easy for us to say, we're going to cut back on free education. We did not. We have to make sure that our people at least go up to year 13. Critically important. And if they want to go to university, they should be able to go to university. Of course, there were some cutbacks. We increased the mark requirements to be able to get TELs, for example, and toppers. We need to continue our health service improvements. A lot of it is being outsourced. We currently, as you know, last year in COVID, we said that you could go to a GP, in particular those people who could not afford normally to go to a GP. People used to go up to the health center or public hospital and queue up. Because of the COVID issues, we said, okay, you can go and access. If somebody's got a headache or a small cut, you can go and visit your local GP. And we'll pay for it. Now, with the revised budget, we have said more services will be offered by the GP, which will pay. You can do your urine test, blood test, cholesterol, renal, liver test, full blood count, nebulizer if you're asthmatic. All of that, and if they've got a cardio machine for your heart, they can actually do that too. And we'll pay for all of that. That's all there. We also now call for expression of interest from dentists. Unfortunately, most of them who applied were from the Suva, Nakasi, Nasori area. So out of the 6 that have been selected, 5 are from here, only 1 is from Lautoka. Again, if you go and do oral consultations, permanent fillings, temporary fillings, and extraction, government will pay for that. We, of course, have negotiated the prices with these people. What is really interesting, and brings me home to the issue about the private sector. When we called for expression of interest from the GPs last year, the Fiji College of General Practitioners, of GPs, said, no, we'll put only 1 bid. One price for all the private doctors in Fiji, $25 consultation. When we know that a GP in Nassori charges $10 for a visit, when we know in Ba they charge $10, but because government was paying, they wanted to charge $25. I'm afraid some people in the private sector have that attitude. And then those doctors who wanted to actually put in the expression of interest, they were threatened by the college and they said, if you join this without coming as a whole group, we will actually not renew your practicing certificate. So we again threatened them. And then they felt free to be able to bid. And today I'm glad to say there's about 43 doctors on that list. And one of them was the former president who actually opposed in the first place. So I'm glad he's seen the light. He's now joined. So all of these things are being done. So you as employers need to understand the level of social wages that is being paid out. Because essentially, if you did not have free education, if you did not have the government paying 50% of the electricity tariff for those who earn less than $30,000 a year, or provide 90,250 liters of free water a year for those households that earn less than $30,000 a year, or GP costs, then there would be enormous pressure on you to increase the salaries. A lot more pressure on you. So when Dr. Patak comes and does the review of the salaries and what rates they should be at the minimum wage, he takes into account all of these factors and then does the calculations. So these things are critically important. Obviously, it builds the capacity of our people. Connectivity is critically important. There are many schools in Fiji up till recently that did not have internet connection. You know, the lockdown, some of you obviously have children. Your teachers were able to print out the worksheets and send it to your children, or you could pick it up from the school. There are certain schools in Fiji where teachers had to travel 10 kilometers by bus and get connectivity, or travel by boat. Now that creates a huge level of discrepancy between those who are connected and those who are not connected. From a fair justice perspective, and indeed, rights perspective, this is most unfair. So we actually recently spent over $1.4 million connecting about 40 schools, including some nursing stations, with internet connection. We gave the teachers laptops, we gave them PCs, printers, and some of them we gave them IP phones. And if there was a community living nearby, we Wi-Fi'd the school compound. So those communities could actually come into the school compound and get Viber, WhatsApp, and what have you. Some form of connectivity. They don't have to travel on a horseback to some mountain peak and get connection, hang off a tree with one leg and get connectivity. That's what used to happen. Of course now, Wailesi is critically important too. We've invested lots of money. And now nowhere in Fiji cannot be connected to Wailesi. Predominantly through terrestrial means and also either satellite. So those are the things that we hear this when you go to rural communities, people say, I saw this on TV. I saw this company is doing X, Y, Z. So it creates public awareness, it empowers people with information. So for us, that is critically important. And of course, for you as employees, it gives you a better crop of people to choose from as far as employment is concerned, employees are concerned. Climate change, as I said, we've talked about this. Minimum wage rate, productivity commission, I also mentioned that, remove the 20 cents fuel duty and VAT restructure, 21-0 rated. There used to be a catch cry. People say, oh, no, 6 basic food items. Actually, it's not. Everybody in Fiji uses toothpaste, hopefully. People use soap. They need washing powder. They need cooking gas. Some people use steel kerosene. Sanitary pads for women. All of these are essential items. You can't just, we could have done a, shoddy job and said, this 6 items, tin fish, oil, rice, flour, that's it. Everybody in Fiji eats. You can't cook a curry without garlic. You can't bake a fish without garlic. People eat onions, they eat potatoes. All of these things are zero-rated VAT. Now, we lost off the bat $165 million just for not charging VAT on those items. But we saw it as something that's necessary, but also at the same time sustainable. We then increased VAT on certain items to 15%. He's not, running some kumbaya show. we have to be able to ensure that there's still some form of revenue. So perfumes, etc. Stereos, you have to pay 15% VAT. It needs to be sustainable. I would like to show you this couple of videos that give you something into perspective. In the meantime, do you have any questions? Just to keep it flowing. Any questions? Okay, the question is what's happened to government's blue bonds? We are working on that. There's obviously a lot of background work that needs to be done in respect of the blue bonds. We issued the green bonds, as you know. It listed on the London Stock Exchange. Now, when you issue bonds for a particular purpose, you need to ensure that in the background you have the right projects identified for them to be funded. We've also, in order to lend credibility, we have third-party validation. The funds that are actually raised from those bonds are actually going for the purpose for which it was stated. So we have a company called Sustainalytics from Europe that verifies what we are doing with the green bonds. As I've said publicly before, the green bonds, great optics, terrible interest rates. We paid over 6% interest rate. It was done very quickly. We're the first emerging economy to actually issue sovereign green. No. It's listed on the London Stock Exchange. Yeah. So, with the blue bonds, the work is being done. We currently, obviously, are looking at various, options. Whether we issue the bonds in Fijian dollars, whether issued in US dollars, who would be the takers for it? We need to obviously make sure the pricing is right. The UK government is working with us very closely on that. So they provided some technical assistance. We are, of course, working with the Reserve Bank of Fiji. There are other institutions that are involved. So we will issue that. And then, of course, these are the projects that we need to identify. But we are quite keen to have that issued very soon. In the blue bonds, again, there will be a certain component of it where the private sector can access those funds. So, sometimes we have a lot of countries, for example, like Seychelles, when they raised the bonds, they said, we're going to use some of the funds to, for example, clean up the ocean. Because Seychelles, apparently, because of the tides, every year used to get like how many tons of flip-flops or whatever, plastic washing up. Then you can say, okay, we'll plant X number of dollars to plant mangroves or seagrasses, or do, pearl farming, work with women organizations, etc., or provide boats and training to people to engage in sustainable fishing. So in respect to the private sector, we also want to have a private sector element where private sector organizations can actually access the funds that we raise through the bonds, so it makes it easier for them. But they have to fit the parameters of what we want done. So in the same way, there are other sort of funding that's going to be made available soon in respect to, for example, wastewater management or waste management. A lot of people don't realize that with the bonds too, if you have, for example, a dump near the sea, as most dumps tend to be, the pollution from that actually seeps into the seawater and damages the reefs. It kills the sea life. So if we have private sector participation in that space, they may develop that they can access funds also through the blue bond. So those are the things that we're looking at. So if you can read it, it doesn't have the dramatic effect without the sound, but if you can read that, we'll just start that again. Sorry about this. Okay, we start from here. Okay, that's it. 1/3 of the world's cereal. Okay, just leave it in. Sorry about that. I thought it worked. It worked very well on Saturday, but we'll blame GPH for this. So just let it play. Just let it play. So, ladies and gentlemen, please, is there any more questions, comments, issues, frustrations, feedback, positive? Okay, there's no questions? Wow, okay. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for your time. And we look forward to your collaboration and your cooperation to be able to navigate our way in the next 6 to 9 months or so, once we sort of get out of this situation that we are in. We are told, for example, by some of the shipping companies that we expect freight costs to come down around about September, October, when a lot more containers will be made available. We're also being told that the price of fuel should stabilize around about January of next year, when there will be some sort of sanity that will return to what's happening at the moment. So in the meantime, we need to be able to plug together, be future focused. As I've said to a lot of businesses, this is really the time to invest. You need to pre-position yourself for the growth that's taking place, and indeed that will actually be quite significant also next year. And I wish you all the best, Vinaka. Thank you.